Hi, welcome Mara. Today's guest is Mara Squicciarini. She is assistant professor at Bocconi University in Milan, Italy, and she got her PhD some years before in Leuven in Belgium. And today we will be talking about some of her exciting research. I'm a big fan of her work. So today's paper we will be talking about is about the role of education, in particular religious education, on industrialization, and hence it's a growth topic for us. And we would like to hear first, Mara, maybe if you could tell us how you think religion enters economics and what got you excited about that link.
Yes. So first of all, thanks to Sascha and Marco for organizing this great initiative. I'm really excited about talking about my paper today. And so why religion? Well, religion plays a very important role in the daily life of a lot of people across the world. It can affect people's beliefs, values, but it can also have an impact on economic development. And how? What is the mechanism through which religion can impact economic development? Well, one important mechanism is through technological and scientific program. But how does this happen? Can we quantify these effects? So basically, these are the questions that really inspired me to study the role of religion for accumulation of human capital and economic development.
Okay. Now, your research is particularly about France, and maybe you can say a few words how you came to pick France and the time period you are looking at.
Yes, so I really like France, even if I'm Italian. But let me tell you a bit about what happened in France during the period of the Second Industrial Revolution, that is the period I'm studying. So contrary to the first industrial revolution, when mostly the upper tail of the skill distribution, so a minority of scientists, entrepreneurs, engineers was really important for industrialization because these people had to push the technological frontier forward. With the second industrial revolution, things change. So technology in general becomes more skill intensive, and this means that worker skills matter. So the French state, as a lot of other states in Europe, started to introduce a more technical education, which means simply like having some notions of math, geometry, geometric systems in primary schools. What was the purpose? Well, the purpose was to form a skilled labor force that could support the industrialization process. Now, since we are talking about religion in France, of course, we are talking about Catholicism. In this period, it hasn't always been the case, but in this period, the Catholic Church was adopting a particularly anti-scientific program. And while the state was introducing this technical education in primary schools, the church was really opposing it and was pushing for religious education. So one key important aspect of this setting is that the tension between this technical education and religion was really strong and was particularly strong in France in this period. The other advantage that is really important and that in a way let me also choose this setting is that France was a very centralized state. So there is no institutional heterogeneity basically. What I'm exploiting is really like religion and in particular religiosity. And here we go to the third advantage, that is that pretty much everybody, basically 98% of the population was Catholic. So this means that what I can look at is the intensity of religion, is the intensity of Catholicism, and I'm not worried that there are like other religious affiliation and this is like confounding my results. Fourth advantage, I don't know if it's third or fourth, it's that I can really study the long term. So I can study this fact of this conflictual relationship between science and religion over several decades. And in particular from 1870 to the First World War, 1914. And finally, which is something super important for economic historians, is that there are like amazing data. So without data, you cannot do much. You can have the best idea, but if you don't find the right data, it's hard to push it forward. And for France, there are really very nice data in this period of time.
Yeah, as a PhD student, I'm very curious. What sort of data did you use and how did you collect it?
So basically, this is like a very important question. I used two, let's say, types of data. Some data are from secondary sources. This means that are from books of historians that already looked at the original sources and basically brought them down in books already. Other data are from primary sources. What does it mean? It means that I had to go to the archive and look at these handwritten documents in Paris and digitize them. So this was in a way, the most fascinating part, but it was also like quite tough because sometimes you don't even know if the data exists. So you go there and it's like, well, maybe I'll find the data I'm looking for. But that's really fascinating because then you really have to look, use, and touch these 19th century handwritten documents, which I really like it.
Yeah.
Like a little bit Indiana Jones research.
Yeah, exactly. And well, when you find, actually, you know what, when you find the data you're looking for, you feel like, oh, I have to celebrate tonight. It's fantastic that these things exist. So
yeah,
I'm searching part still, so I'm waiting for that feeling.
yeah, I agree. Economic historians are detectives, and being in the archive is exciting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, tell us a bit about the results. So, with all that amazing data, what are your findings?
So let's say my research question was basically to understand when religion can hamper economic development and through which mechanism. So what I find in the context of France of the Second Industrial Revolution is that religion is negatively associated with economic development only after 1870. So only after the Second Industrial Revolution started, not before. And then I ask, why? What's the mechanism? Why is it only after and not before? And here I focus on education, accumulation of human capital. So what I find is that in the more religious areas, when there was this technical curriculum being introduced in primary schools, there was this religious area were adopting this curriculum more slowly. And they were even increasing the religious schools. So then I look at the relationship between these religious schools and industrial development. And I find that the share of religious education is negatively associated with industrial and economic development about 10 to 15 years later, which, if you think of it, is really when school-age children finish primary schools and then enter the labor market. So it really seems that this type of education that was affected by, let's say, the religiosity of parents that really wanted their children to go to religious schools, then has an effect on economic development through the curriculum that these children were studying when they were in primary schools. These are basically the results of several pages in like 1 minute.
That is fascinating. So as readers and as someone that might have stumbled into your paper online, how can we interpret these findings?
So let's say that there are quite some things that we can learn and we can interpret from these findings. First of all, I'm not showing that religion is always bad or always has a negative effect on economic development. What I find is that the effect of religion on economic development becomes negative when religion in a way hinders, hampers the accumulation of, in the paper I say, economically useful human capital. That is the type of human capital that is useful for economic development, the knowledge, the technological scientific knowledge that is important to foster economic development. So this is the first thing that we can learn. The second thing is that it's not only like the type of religious affiliations that matter. So it's not only if you are Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, but the intensity of religion is key. So indeed, what I look at is the intensity of Catholicism, right? Everybody's Catholic. And the religiosity, the intensity, determines in a way the importance that you give to religious norms, to religious values. If these are clashing with the knowledge, modernity, you're basically hampering even more the inflow of this new knowledge. So the intensity is really important. And finally, the other thing that we can learn is another important takeaway is really the importance of secular education. Another interesting thing about France, which I didn't mention before, is that France was really like a pioneer in the process of secularization. Was one of the first states that introduced secular education. So learning basically how this process took place, what are the consequences, what are the implications is really important because we know how important secular education can be. So this is basically what we can learn from 19th century France that can also be useful for today economic development.
Yeah, fascinating. So your research was recently published in the American Economic Review, which is one of the top journals in economics. What do you think made the editor and the referees excited about your work?
Well, you should ask them. I'm happy they liked it. I can tell you what made me excited, which is basically almost all of it. And no, I really like, in general, like doing research, and I think that the nice aspect of this paper, at least for me, is that it really tries to understand how religion can affect human capital accumulation through education. And in particular, not only through the quantity of education, but through the content of education. So what children study is really important. And so I think that's really an important aspect because, you know, we can also learn something for today, religious education and secular education, and more generally for how much the content of education are important for accumulation of human capital. So I think that's a very important aspect of the paper. In general, I like all of it. Also as I said, the data collection part and the like reading about historical books, it's also very fascinating. So,
what was the most challenging part of the paper?
Well, as I said, maybe you know, when you look for data sometimes, or actually when the referee asks you to look for new data, you hope those data will be there in the archives, but you don't know if they are. So that could be somehow challenging. And well, challenging also that maybe it takes a lot of time to have, you know, a complete and final program, which you can see is like super nice compared to when you started, but sometimes it can take a lot of time. And so sometimes you can also have like ups and downs when you do research, but overall it's like super nice and super fascinating.
Many people don't know that, but like to publish a paper, it might take many years. What was the longest period of time it took you to publish a paper?
So the first time I started to work on this paper was in 2015. When I was a visiting student at Stanford University, and they first presented it in front of Ran Abramiski and his like group of PhD students. And then it was published in 2020. So it's basically 5 years.
Wow. Yeah.
Sascha, what was
a lot of time.
That is just unfortunately how it is. It often takes many, many years, especially with data intensive work, going to the archives.
Exactly.
Lots of things are unpredictable. Yeah.
Sascha, what was your longest?
Oh, this year I got a paper accepted that I started in 2008. So that is now the 12th year.
Yeah. Get ready if you want to do research. It takes time.
Mara,
but it pays off. It pays off because it's really nice. And you also, like, what's nice also is that you see your little baby, that is your little paper, really growing and taking shape in a much like nicer way. So that's nice.
That's the most rewarding part, I guess. Plus, I think many people, if the general audience and students, undergrads, if you ask them, if I tell you economists, what do you think? Many of them say, oh, I think of bankers and money. But like, as we're showing today, there's much more in economics than just like banks and money. So what inspired you to become an economic historian / economist?
So when I chose economics as a teenager, even if I really liked history, philosophy, these were like subjects that I really liked. I chose economics because as a teenager, I wanted to save the world. Of course, that didn't happen. And so then I basically, in a way, joined the two things that I really liked, that is economics, together with my passions that I had for history, philosophy, and so on. And I think this is really like a perfect mix, because you have, in a way, you get to read these books, you get to go to the archives, you get to know like a lot of knowledge about what happened in the past. And at the same time, you can analyze what happened in the past using econometric techniques. So you can really understand, using the data that you collected, what happened, like in a more scientific way. And I think this is really like what makes economic history like the best field you could choose. So yeah.
Yeah, but what is noticeable when one looks at your CV is that you've also done other exciting work. And one of my favorites is that you co-edited a book on the economics of chocolate. Can you maybe tell us a bit why you didn't continue doing research in that area and went to economic history?
Yeah, so the economics of chocolate is really because I love chocolate. That's no other reason for like doing a book like that. Actually, we started by organizing a conference on the economics of chocolate. I was doing my PhD in Belgium back then. And, you know, all the Belgian chocolatiers were actually also giving us a lot of chocolate to taste. So that was the best conference I could, you know, I eat chocolate every day. And then, but beyond that, we realized that there is really like a lot of interesting stories about the economics of chocolate that go from the cocoa supply chain. And so how poor farmers are actually growing cocoa, how this is processed, manufactured, and how then it's sold in the market, especially in developed countries. At the same time, you know, for instance, there is a lot of research trying to study how to produce chocolate that doesn't melt, especially for the Indian market, where you know, people like sweet things, but the problem is that chocolate melts very easily. So there are like a lot of interesting anecdotes and stories about chocolate beyond the fact of being like a fantastic food. And then we basically put all these stories in a book that's the economics of chocolate. And it has been quite successful, actually. We already had 2 editions, so.
Amazing, wow.
Okay, is the conference still running?
We could organize the second conference. Would be happy to.
Yes, please. Just organizing after COVID is over. We're happy to have it again and go to conference. And that will be my top priority, I guess.
I will let you know.
Well, so I'm sure you're working on other exciting research. So we'll be very happy to have you back in the future if you want to tell us more about the other research papers you're working on. So thank you so much for being with us today and telling us.
Thank you so much, Mara. That was fantastic.
Thank you to both of you, and I will be delighted to be back. It was nice.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Sascha, for helping me running the interview. And I'll see you guys at the next episode.